Okay, good afternoon and welcome to all our members and friends, and thank you very much for joining us today for the official launch of the ANZCCJ Sustainability Committee. Very glad to have you all here with us today. My name is Emily Hallems. I'm the Executive Director here at ANZCCJ, and I'm very glad to hand to our Chair, Sally Townsend, who is going to officially welcome you all to today's event. Thank you very much, Sally.
Thanks, Emily, and thank you very much to the Chamber members and friends for joining our first ever Sustainability Committee today. It's wonderful to have so many people on and willing to get involved and willing to learn more about what our businesses are doing. So first of all, thank you to our chairs who put their hands up to lead this committee, Tracy Whiriskey from Ashurst and Shu Saito, who is the Japan head of Macquarie Asset Management. It's a big job, it's a very broad topic, and as we know, it's bound to create a lot of interest. So thank you to you too for stepping up. So sustainability has almost become a generic term that has entered our daily conversations, from children at school learning about the SDGs to almost daily announcements about government partnerships or new hydrogen technology, decarbonisation. But what does it mean for our businesses in our chamber? How's it being approached? We have 15 odd sectors that we cover in the chamber, and it's not just one topic, it is very, very broad. So this committee hopes to serve as a platform to support and enhance the ambition of businesses in our chamber membership who are really committed to taking a leadership role here. So today we have our Deputy Heads of Mission, HKU, from the Australian Embassy, and Dominic Walton-France from the New Zealand Embassy. Both thank you very much for your time today to give us an update. And we're hearing from three representatives of prominent chamber member companies, Lendlease, National Australia Bank and Global Perspectives, to learn more about what sustainability means to their organisations. So I'll hand it back to you, Emily. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally. We'd now like to welcome our committee chair, Shu Saito, to give us an official introduction to the chamber and its vision. Thank you very much, Shu.
Hi, thank you, Emily, for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this inaugural ANZCCJ Sustainability Committee event. My name is Shu Saito, and I lead Macquarie Asset Management Japan. The more interconnected our world becomes, the more rapid development can disrupt or transform society. This unpredictability creates challenges, but for agile and flexible businesses, it also creates opportunity. Not surprisingly, as the world grappled with global pandemic, racial injustice and social inequality, remaining optimistic over last year has at times felt challenging. While climate change is often at the center of the conversation about sustainability of the topic of ESG, the ongoing discussion about racial and social equity and the effects of the pandemic are also critically important. We welcome the renewed focus from all of our stakeholders, including you, today participating in session. Needless to say, concept and interpretation of sustainability must be broad as it covers enormous ground. However, it is our hope that this committee will contribute to stakeholders' awareness, recognition, understanding, discussions, and lead to action being taken for a better future. Let me touch a little about what, why, and how of the ANZCCJ Sustainability Initiative. Starting from what regarding sustainability, we have a dual focus. The first being sustainable investment and trade, and the second being sustainable organizations. As we bring together this committee, we expect to discuss several examples of sustainable investment and trade, such as energy transition, hydrogen renewables, green infrastructure, sustainable resources, green finance, sustainable retail and consumption, sustainable hospital, tourism, travel, sustainable cities, and sustainable supply chains. These examples has a positive impact not only financially, but brings social benefit to the community through initiatives like social housing. One of the few positive side effects of COVID was that I think people has become more aware of the importance of well-being in addition to data security and privacy, governance, and ethics. I'm sure that Japanese society could see a lot of opportunities to field diversity and inclusion, which is an important part of sustainability. By seeing, for example, sports like as Naomi Osaka, for example, in tennis. Low teenager girl won the Olympic gold medal in skateboard. Also this year, Sapporo District Court ruled that it was unconstitutional to disallow same-sex marriage. I personally used to feel that the view on the street in Japan is a kind of a monochrome compared with these in London or New York. However, I sometimes feel that it becomes a bit colorful than before. It seems to be small changes, but it may be a small but steady and inevitable direction applying also to the organization. Switching into why, we believe that sustainability initiatives and the practice are crucial for business longevity and the better outcomes for our economy, environment, and society. The Anz Ccj Sustainability Committee's purpose is to promote sustainable investment, trade, business, and collaboration between Australia, Japan, and New Zealand. Lastly, moving into how. Anz Ccj would like to promote awareness, share experience, support advocacy, and provide opportunities to build connections and collaboration to support sustainability strategy across large corporates, SME businesses, startups, academia, and government. We understand that sustainability is a journey and that everyone is at a different stage. So we want to ensure that whatever size of the company and in whatever industry, our events and programs help you to take next step. I'm confident we will all learn a lot from speakers and panelists during today's session. These are a summary of why, what, and how of ANZCCJ Sustainability Committee, but I'd like to share my professional experience as well. As some of you may know, Macquarie Asset Management is recognized as one of the largest infrastructure manager with over 27 years experience investing and managing infrastructure assets globally. We have a basic concept of privilege and responsibility, which means that owning infrastructure, which is essential social assets, is a privilege, but at the same time, we are obligated to promote high quality of services to its users. If we don't fulfill that responsibility, it would have a significant impact. For example, a road full of holes, poor quality water, aging bridges, under-repaired ports, and low-quality airports, to name a few. In order to fulfill responsibility as an infrastructure manager, Macquarie Asset Management has seen how our approach is sustainability benefits all stakeholders over the short and the long term, investors, employees, communities, and the future generations. Sustainability is not just good in the sense of being the right thing to do, it is a good business. Good sustainability practice have helped us reduce operating costs, mitigate operational risks, and increase the quality and reliability of earnings. In December 2020, Macquarie Asset Management announced its commitment to invest and manage its portfolio in line with global net zero by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement goal. I believe we were the first large asset manager in the world to make a commitment to 2040. In March this year, we reinforced this commitment by becoming signatories to Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. Across our infrastructure, renewables, agriculture, and real estate portfolio, with the help of industry experts, we are implementing the first stage of its commitment. We are working with our portfolio asset to set expectations and provide them with the tools, training, and the resources to help them establish baselines, set targets, and develop the plans to achieve them. We are trusted to manage essential assets that impact people's daily lives, including housing, water, power, communications, and transport. We recognize the responsibility and opportunity we have to place sustainability at the center of everything we do. It brings strong sense of purpose to our team's daily activities. We are proud of progress we have made so far, but we have a long, long journey ahead of us, and that is exciting. I'd like to share some concrete examples of my firm's initiatives in some session in the future, but finally, I hope that you would find today's event useful, and thank you in advance for your support for the Anz Ccj Sustainability Committee. That's it from my side, and back to you, Emily. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shu. That's fantastic. And in a moment, we will be handing over to HKU, Deputy Head of Mission at the Australia Embassy in Tokyo. But before we do so, today, for our members who are joining us for the session, we have opened an online quiz that we'd love your contribution to throughout. So I'm just going to share my screen here for you. Some of you may be familiar with Slido. It's an online quiz platform. And today we'd like to build a word tree among our members. We have such a diverse range of our members joining us for today's session. So we'd really like to know from you, in one word, what does sustainability mean to you and or your organisation? So you can access the quiz either by your phone, you can scan the QR code that's currently on screen, or you can also enter this code at slido.com. We'll leave this open throughout the rest of the session today, so we'd love for you to join on and share your thoughts. If you have any trouble accessing this at any time, please just shoot us a message through the chat box and we'll be able to help you. So thank you again to Shu, and thank you to Sally as well for opening the session. I'm now very glad to invite HKU, Deputy Head of Mission at the Australian Embassy in Tokyo, to share what sustainability means for Australia and our current areas of focus. So thank you very much, HK.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you everyone for joining us today. What a great initiative by the ANZCCJ on establishing this Committee on Sustainability. As Shu said, and as Emily also just alluded to, sustainability means lots of things to and lots of different things to lots of different people, especially to the members of the ANZCCJ. But certainly at the government level, it's true that sustainability has become another word for climate change, actions to address climate change globally. And these actions by the government will fundamentally change the way economic activities are carried out and, frankly, the way people live in the future. And this will both create risks for businesses, but also really exciting opportunities. And that's kind of the area that I want to focus on. And given that, my talk will be very much on Australia's actions on climate change. I think it's fair to be really upfront first, be honest and upfront first to say, yes, Australia has not pledged to reach net zero emissions by 2050. But often I think that is misunderstood or misinterpreted by too many people as Australia not actually doing our fair share or even more than our fair share towards addressing climate change, or Australia actually not having a clear plan to continue to do so into the future. So I wanted to actually share with you today how strong our track record has been on achieving results on climate change, but also how clear our plan is. And finally, what we are doing with Japan to actually collaborate and cooperate in this very important area that will create ample opportunities for a business community like yours, where you have really good understanding of Australia, but also Japan. So let me start with Australia's track record. Despite what people think or say, we have actually very strong track record on this. In fact, we have reduced emissions by over 20% between 2005 and 2020, compared to OECD average of only 6%. So 20% is Australia's result, 6% is the OECD's average. We are, as a result, on track to achieve our 2030 emissions reduction target. It's most likely that we will actually exceed our target of 26 to 28%. And since 2017, we have invested more than $35 billion in renewable energy in Australia. This has actually led to some highest level of deploying new wind and solar energy source, which is about 10 times the global average per person. Australia is also the world's highest uptake country when it comes to rooftop solar. In fact, 1 in 4 households in Australia have rooftop solar systems, and I know many of you online who own houses in Australia will actually agree with me, and it's most likely that you have a solar system on your rooftop as well. So, you know, achievements are clear. Are we complacent about that? No. Australia also has very clear plan when it comes to addressing climate change. But our focus has been about what's practical, what's achievable without damaging economic activities and growth. And as a result, we have chosen to focus on bringing down the cost of new and emerging low emission technologies so that it becomes competitive to the more traditional existing approaches. That's been our #1 focus, and we are serious about this. So Australia has developed what we are referring to as a technology investment roadmap. And this roadmap actually provides an outline for around $20 billion of Australian government money to invest over the next decade to 2030. We hope that this is going to mobilise around $80 billion in total in technology investment. And our priority technologies include clean hydrogen. We've talked about that already quite a bit. Carbon capture and storage, low emissions steel and aluminium, long duration energy storage, that's like batteries, and soil carbon. And we have set ourselves some really ambitious stretch goals around each of those areas as well. In addition, the Australian government is supporting efforts to make Australia's natural environment also really resilient to climate change. So these are about having better disaster preparedness, disaster management, and research into nature-based solutions to some of these problems. So you can see straight away already how there's a lot of collaborative work that's happening between Australia and Japan on that as well, because natural disasters are quite common in Japan as well. Finally, I wanted to also talk about how Australia is collaborating with international partners and supporting our neighbours to tackle climate change. But I think, given the audience, what I want to do is really hone in on what we are doing with Japan. So when you look at the government-to-government agreement in this space, we already have many. I know I've spoken to some of you about how our two prime ministers agreed to a Japan-Australia partnership on decarbonisation through technology. This was achieved in the margins of the G7 summit that was held in the UK. This is meant to provide a framework under which now we can both come up with real practical, tangible projects that both governments will actually finance and support to really accelerate the technology that's needed to reduce emissions. We also already have a joint statement on cooperation on hydrogen and fuel cells. We know how important hydrogen is in this new world, and that cooperation is already well underway between Australia and Japan. Many of you would have also heard about the Australia-Japan Hydrogen Energy Supply Chain project in La Trobe, where they actually have produced hydrogen from brown coal with appropriate carbon capture and storage. That is about to be transported to Japan, the first ever hydrogen vessel to go across the ocean to transport clean hydrogen to Japan from Australia. At the government-to-government engagement level, we have many strong architectures in place, starting with leader-level summit, where they meet annually, and this topic is one of the most important topics that our leaders talk about. That is supported by Australia-Japan Ministerial Economic Dialogue, which once again happens annually, and I attended the one that was actually held just recently in Japan, where Energy Minister as well as Trade Minister attends with the Japanese Minister Kajiyama. We also have Australia-Japan high-level group on energy and minerals consultation, which is held annually, once again providing a very good platform for discussions such as this. But what's really exciting is the various R&D collaboration projects that we are seeing emerging amongst universities, as well as private sector companies. There are so many Japanese companies that are already investing heavily in Australia in the area of renewable energy and conversion of those renewable into hydrogen as well. So it's really, really exciting times, and there's plenty that's going on. Just as an example, Ministry of Environment in Japan is supporting a project for Japanese companies to produce, and I know Sally knows this very well because it's happening in South Australia, to produce hydrogen, green hydrogen, through a technology that they've developed. And we are now in conversation with them about how Australia and Japan can work together to then look at exporting green hydrogen from Australia to third countries. That's how advanced the discussion is, and it's really exciting times. Another example I wanted to give you is that with Japan's movement to 2050 net zero emissions, you know how Japan does things, they do it in huge scale as well. And recently they've introduced a Green Innovation Fund with $23 billion that they have to actually give out as grants in the next 10 years. Just think about that. Just innovation fund focused on technology only, and they will be rolling out $23 billion, and that's US dollars, by the way, so it's a bit more than 23 Australian billion dollars. What we are trying to do now is complement that so that we can actually allow Australian researchers and businesses a way to tap into that indirectly. So Australian government with our own complementary process that actually matches, not quite in dollars, but matches in process what Japan is trying to do with their Green Innovation Fund. So as you can see, plenty of opportunities. So if as a business sector, and it doesn't matter what sector you're in, because frankly, the changes has to come not just from the supplier, but also from demand side as well. So if you're quick to jump on this amazing journey that Australia and Japan is going through right now, then I think you will all agree there are plenty of exciting opportunities there for the business sector as well. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, HK. We'd now like to invite Dominic Walton-France, the Deputy Head of Mission from the New Zealand Embassy, Tokyo, to share the New Zealand perspective on sustainability and current updates from New Zealand. Thank you very much, Dom.
Thank you very much. Kia ora koutou katoa. Firstly, thanks to the ANZCCJ for this initiative to set up a sustainability committee and for the opportunity to speak here at this launch event. So sustainability, of course, is a huge topic. When I was asked to speak on the topic, it was quite a daunting assignment. So I started researching and quickly became overwhelmed by how much information there is online on this topic. So I started looking at some definitions, and Emily, if you are able to bring up this slides, I'll show you that, yeah, the first definition, the most popular one that I found, was talking about development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Next slide, thanks. And from a business perspective, sustainability involves concepts of society, economy, and environment, and long-term resilience. These definitions, by the way, came from the New Zealand Sustainable Business Network, which I'll talk about. Next slide, thanks. So today I'm covering and talking about what sustainability means in Aotearoa, New Zealand. What I've got up here on is some of the topics I'll cover, which is the New Zealand Climate Change Commission, how we're responding to climate change, because of course climate change is one of the biggest, or if not the biggest, sustainability challenge of our times. What support government is providing for reducing emissions, and also recently some discussions around tourism and immigration in our country and putting them on a sustainable footing. Lastly, I'll mention the New Zealand Sustainable Business Network. Next slide, thanks. So this slide sets out the framework for how New Zealand is responding to climate change. I'll go through each of the points in the next few slides. But just a quick overview, we have a Zero Carbon Act like Japan, which sets out New Zealand's commitment to reaching carbon neutrality on greenhouse gases, except for methane, by 2050. So I'll move along to the next one and just explain quickly why, on the next slide, sorry, Emily, why we have a separate target for methane, which is that methane is a gas that breaks down in the atmosphere within about 10 years, whereas CO2, carbon dioxide, will be in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. So this is why we have different targets for these two areas. But these are now set in law, just as Japan has done around setting this 2050 target. Next slide, thanks. So to help us to meet these targets, we've set up an independent commission, which its job is to consult widely and then advise the government on what changes are needed to our economy to meet our climate change targets. So the commission will also provide advice on emissions budgets. So these are 5-yearly emissions budgets of how much carbon we can put into the atmosphere, and suggestions around emissions reductions plans. So the government will need to respond and put together these emissions reduction plans. As the climate change also oversees the emissions trading scheme as well. Next slide, thanks. So where are we up to? The Climate Commission has prepared its first report, and it consulted widely on this. It was out for about 6 months for consultation, and it has presented some ambitious suggested changes to the New Zealand economy that we will need to tackle in coming years and decades, but particularly focusing on the next 5, 10, 15 years. So the aim was to set out the first 3 emissions budgets out to 2035. And next slide, thanks. So the government has to respond by the end of this year to those recommendations. So I'll just run through some of these recommendations, but reminding the audience that these are at the moment just recommendations and not yet official policy. The recommendations are quite wide-ranging, and to respond to climate change, there are going to have to be major changes to our society and our economy in the way energy is produced, the way people travel, the way communities live, and in the way that land is used. These changes will affect all of us, including businesses. Next slide, thanks. So one of the first and most important recommendations is around phasing out fossil fuels. We only have at the moment in New Zealand 1 coal-fired power plant. We have over 80% renewable electricity, which is a good start, but we have set a government target to get to 100% renewable electricity by the end of the decade. And that is going to be a challenge. Not only that, we need to expand our electricity supply because of the additional demand from all of the electric vehicles and other energy switching that we expect to take place. Next slide, thanks. This slide has quite a bit of information, and given the time constraints, I won't go into it too much, but just to show you that our energy sector is quite complicated, and there's quite a lot of work going on at the moment to look at how we increase our renewable electricity generation. So we're looking at green hydrogen, we're undertaking an electricity pricing review, we're looking at changes to the Gas Act, we're looking at ways to electrify process heat, and to look at doing this and we would use the term just transitions. So this is an idea about thinking of how do we help industries and people to transition from one fossil fuel-based industry to renewable energy-focused future. And this will require government support into retraining and investment in research, particularly new technologies. Thank you. Next slide. So the next sector, one of our big emitting sectors, is transport. The Climate Change Commission is recommending that we try to completely decarbonise this sector by 2050, but by 2035 to be aiming that all imports of light vehicles should be electric by 2035. And to do that, the New Zealand government has already just recently introduced a clean car discount, which provides up to $8,600 New Zealand dollars for a new battery electric vehicle, and $5,750 for a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So we understand that at the moment, electric vehicles are more expensive and need some sort of government subsidy to encourage their uptake. Next slide, thanks. Another source of emissions in our economy is industrial processes, for example, pulp and paper making. And some of these processes use either gas or coal-fired boilers. The government is making funds available to subsidise the cost of switching to alternative energies. So this is another area where business and government is working together to transform the economy and move towards that renewable future. Thank you. Next slide. Just to show you, I guess, how comprehensive these changes are going to be to our society, another area of recommendation is around planting new native forests and New Zealand's production forestry, which is a really important carbon sink. But there's a trade-off here between the land we can use for food production and the land we can use for carbon sinks. So that's another huge debate that's going on in New Zealand at the moment. The New Zealand government is working with industry on a Forestry Industry Transformation Plan and has set a target of planting 1 billion trees by 2028. Next slide. Buildings and construction, another important sector that the Climate Change Commission is looking at. And here, the heating and cooling of buildings are, of course, an important source of emissions. So the Climate Change Commission is recommending strengthening building codes, scaling up energy efficiency programs, and mandating building energy performance programs for commercial and public buildings. Thank you. Next slide. Agriculture makes up around about half of New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions. It's one of our largest economic sectors, and it is accepting the challenge of addressing climate change through an initiative that they are calling He Waka Eke Noa, which means we're all in this together, or we're all in the same boat. Next slide, thanks. This slide shows a quick overview of some of the commitments that the agriculture sector has made to move towards a more climate-friendly future. The basis of this commitment is to adapt to climate change while still maintaining sustainable food production, so maintaining productivity, and also maintaining competitiveness and economic viability. So it's all those different elements of sustainability wrapped up into this plan. The basis of the plan is working at the farm level to measure farm level emissions and then to reduce those emissions over time. Next slide, thanks. The New Zealand government has not exempted itself either from all these requirements. So the New Zealand government has committed to making organisations within the public sector carbon neutral from 2025. And this will also be a huge challenge for all of us in the public sector. So this is not just something we're asking businesses to do, but we're leading by example. The first task will be to put together our plans for how we're going to achieve this goal and offset any emissions that remain in 2025. Thank you. Next slide. So lastly, I wanted to touch on a couple of important sectors that have been affected by COVID in recent times. In normal times, we would see more than 7 million people a year into New Zealand. But in the 12 months from March last year to March this year, only 165,000 people came in. So COVID has been this huge interruption to people flows, which allows us an opportunity to rethink our tourism and immigration settings and when we begin to reconnect with the world next year. If you're interested, our Tourism Minister, Stuart Nash, has given 2 major speeches this year in which he made it clear that the status quo, we won't be returning to the status quo in our tourism and immigration settings. Any changes will obviously have big implications for business. So again, consultation with business is ongoing in this area. So lastly, my last slide, I wanted to briefly mention the Sustainable Business Network, which is New Zealand's largest sustainable business organisation. Sustainable Business Network NZ provides advisory services and supports members to take action on climate change and reduce waste. One area they provide advice on is on this plethora of sustainability certifications there are out there in the marketplace. And that might be one area that ANZCCJ might want to consider as part of this committee that you've just set up. So I guess in closing, I wanted to say my key message is that there's a lot happening in the space around sustainability, but there is assistance available, both from government and from business networks like ANZCCJ. E waka eke noa, we're all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dom, and thank you very much to HK and to the Australian New Zealand embassies for joining us and for sharing these presentations with us today. It was a fantastic start to the session. We'll now be moving on to the panel discussion. So I would like to hand over to our moderator and co-chair, Tracy Whiriskey, to lead this session. Thank you very much, Tracy.
Thank you very much, Emily, and to HK and Dominic for those insights. We're honoured today to have 3 distinguished guests from our membership to join our panel and to discuss sustainability. What does it mean? and why is it now business critical? Our first panelist will be familiar to many of you, Andrew Gauci. Andrew assumed his present position as head of the Lendlease business in Japan in December 2007. The Lendlease Japan business has seen tremendous growth and diversification in his tenure, now employing over 500 professionals in the fields of project management, construction, development, and investment. Earlier this year, Lendlease announced ambitious sustainability targets, including net zero by 2040 and $250 million in social value by 2025, stating their intention to work with and learn from their clients, partners, tenants, and supply chain as they create the pathways towards achieving these sustainability targets and support industry transformation. David Jenkins is our next panelist. He leads NAB's sustainable finance team and has been active in sustainable debt markets for over 10 years. He works closely with NAB's treasury, coverage, and capital markets teams, servicing clients across Australia, New Zealand, Asia, the UK, and USA, developing and originating sustainable financing and investment solutions for NAB and its clients. He joined NAB in 2010 and has over 15 years of financial market experience across a broad range of solutions, origination, structuring, and execution roles. David has worked with many clients to establish their sustainable debt programs, and his team has arranged a broad range of innovative green, social, and sustainability bonds for both NAB and its customers. David is an active member of industry bodies, including the Australia Sustainable Finance Initiative, the ICMA Green Bond and Social Bond Principles Advisory Council, the Climate Transition Finance Working Group, the AMPLA Green and Sustainability Linked Loan Committee, the Climate Bonds Initiative, amongst other organisations. Our final panellist today is Gavin Dixon. He is the co-founder and director of Global Perspectives, a Tokyo-based sustainability integration consultancy. Gavin has worked in Asia, Europe, Russia, Scandinavia, and the South Pacific in a wide variety of industries, including professional sport, international travel, human development consulting, and sustainability consulting. Over the last 6 years, Global Perspective, his company, has been working with numerous global and Japanese companies to develop their human capital to deliver sustainability transformation. Gavin's main focus has been helping partners with organisational sustainability cultural change, international sustainability program localisation and integration, materiality and strategy development, and project delivery. He is an in-demand speaker for companies, educational institutions, and non-government actors across Asia on building sustainability awareness, identifying opportunities, and shifting words to actions to the benefit of individuals, companies, and society as a whole. Gavin also works with sustainability social impact focused startups in product and strategy development, investment sourcing, and market entry. Perhaps, thank you, Andrew, David, and Gavin for your time today. Perhaps, Andrew, if we start with you and we hear about what your business has been experiencing here on the ground in terms of sustainability. How important is it to your business, and how has that changed in the last 5 years?
Thanks, Tracy, and thanks for having me on. Look, for us, it's absolutely business critical to make fundamentally sustainability a core to the way the business operates. Now, I'm not sure if people are aware, but 40% of the world's carbon emissions are coming from the buildings that we live and work in, all of us, right? So for a company that revolves around the real estate sector, obviously we have a lot to do to ensure that governments and other businesses, our tenants, are going to meet their targets. There's a lot of pressure for us to create the most sustainable buildings that can be built in the market. Our tenants today will not move into a building unless it has the highest level of certification, a LEED building certificate or a CASB building certificate. So we can't get multinational tenants if we don't build to the highest sustainability standards, which means it impacts the bottom line today. We cannot compete without being the most sustainable builder in the market. But it goes beyond that now. Capital is now being governed by how sustainable their investments are. Now, if we don't get the capital to build these buildings, again, we don't survive. So we're starting to get, I think we've got $800 million in green bonds. We've got, most of our investors are requiring us to meet these extremely high standards, or they won't provide us the capital. So that's big business. So in terms of big business, it's pretty obvious: no capital, no business, no tenants for us, no rent, and no business. So it's dead. It's absolutely business critical. But then you look at for the SMEs and the smaller businesses, it is also critical for them because they're our suppliers. And we've got to look at our supply chain, and their standards have to change, and they have been changing. So we select our subcontractors, our suppliers, our providers based on their ability to provide the most sustainable standards. Otherwise, we can't meet our goals. So if you don't get on the wagon today, this is not like the world 10 years ago. If you do not provide sustainable product, you don't have a business. And some countries are further advanced than others, and government policies are helpful and becoming more and more important. But the social responsibility of businesses is now driving the bottom line, and that's where we are.
Thank you, Andrew, for those insights. When we think of buildings, perhaps don't naturally think of climate change and how much of an impact they have. That's really eye-opening, and how business critical it is to you across that full chain. You touched on capital, Andrew. David, do you mind if we pass on to you now and just explore a little bit more about sustainable finance and how significant impact that is having on businesses today?
Sure. So, as Andrew would know, and he touched on earlier, sustainable financing is really becoming mainstream at the large end of town. Certainly Lendlease have been very active in that space with their recent debt issuance. And as many of you would know, sustainable finance is typically defined as investing or financing that takes into account the ESG risk factors of an economic activity or the project. So traditionally that may have been what people saw as green infrastructure, but it's much more than that. It focuses on both, environmental factors such as addressing climate change, reducing emissions, or the sustainable use of finite natural resources, social factors such as the human rights issues that Andrew touched on, supply chain, and then the governance factors around employee relations, management, compensation. And what we're seeing now is through the period of COVID coming into effect, sustainability and sustainable finance has really come to the forefront. Where it is at the moment, we see it's fundamental to every discussion we have with a customer in terms of financing. It's no longer considered a nice to have. It's essential. And as a bank and a financier, our focus on sustainability is fundamental to everything we do. We look at it through the lens of it's a long-term risk to the business, to the customer. If we can improve their ESG risk, it's a better credit risk, and therefore has a lower risk of default. In terms of importance, on the investor side, it's been demand-led. There's no shortage of capital looking to support this, but on the other side, there's a huge need for financing. Asia has been recognised as one of the areas of the highest greenhouse gas emissions globally, and just the sheer volume of funding that's required to flow into that to address that provides a huge opportunity. But on the other side, it has to come from somewhere, whether it be private capital, government financing, and the like. And Bloomberg probably summed it up well by saying, at the pace we're operating at the moment, by 2025, ESG-themed financing will comprise over a third of the global assets under management. So that's well north of 53 trillion, I think they estimated. So it's no longer niche, it's well and truly mainstream.
Thank you very much, David. They're very big numbers and very interesting to hear how mainstream this has become and how it's now a must-have. Gavin, do you mind if we turn to you now? You consult across a broad range of industries. Keen to hear any common threads amongst your clients in terms of what sustainability looks like for them, and how you have been helping them to develop sustainable practices to help them with this transformation.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. It's a wonderful thing in sustainability, because when you're dealing with every company, they all have different relationships with sustainability. And as with all relationships, it's complicated. But if you're going to really break it down into how that looks, it's pretty much about being reactive or proactive towards it. And the mindset is it an obligation or is it an opportunity? And the way that looks as a company goes through its sustainability journey, as loathsome as that term is that at the beginning, it might look like something you've got a CSR department, or you've just got some small projects inside. There's not a lot of senior engagement coming on, or there's not executive engagement. But as a company starts to react more to external pressures, just like Andrew and David have been talking about, senior management gets involved. They start to change often the processes, the reporting, the frameworks without developing the people. They're still fairly internally focused. The companies that we see really moving from that obligation sort of reactive mindset and behaviors are the ones that are looking towards building an environment within the company that develops the people, but also engaging externally and working with government, working with their supply chains, the customer base, also working with the social sector or the civic sector with NGOs and those type of things. And that's actually seeing sustainability as a opportunity, something they're being proactive about, and they're actually leading, they're getting ahead of the curve. And they're the companies that are really sort of, I think, benefiting the most from sustainability and actually having the biggest impact. So it's that shift from obligation to opportunity and being reactive to being proactive, and developing not only your processes and the reporting and the frameworks, but developing the people internally. So a perfect example is we've been working with a big Japanese food company that is B2C here in Japan. And so they haven't had much external pressures about changing their sustainability process. But in Europe, it's all about B2B. And there was getting a lot of external pressures from their customers in Europe. Europe was pushing Japan to start moving forward and getting things. There was a lot of pushback from the headquarters because it was just not, it was seen as an obligation. Europe was seeing it as an opportunity. Once we were able to cross that bridge, the headquarters came on board. We've been working with them around doing materiality assessments and building strategies. They've now seen huge opportunities all over the world by shifting the culture and the frameworks towards a sustainability thing, and they're proactively moving ahead of the market in other areas around the world. And they're looking at sort of 10 to 15, possibly 20% year-on-year growth based around the benefits of these sustainability transformations. So it's a very, very big one. Basically, it's all about relationship to it, and whether it's that reactive, proactive type of relationship.
Gavin, I really like that analogy of moving from an obligation to an opportunity, a real positive message there. And I think it resonates with what HK mentioned earlier about getting ahead of the curve and seeing this as an opportunity to grow your business. Also interested to hear that reference to Europe driving some of the changes here. And we've seen the EU just enact the EU climate law, enshrining into legislation these goals. So it'll be interesting to see the future impact of that as well.
Yeah,
Just with that compare and contrast from Japan to offshore, Andrew, do you mind if I turn back to you just in terms of that comparison between Australia and Japan around sustainability, what you're seeing in your industry, and what opportunities you think that difference creates in terms of potential trade and investment?
Sure, I'll be sort of sector specific. Obviously, the real estate sector. Sadly, Japan's been very slow to catch on and is currently well behind where Australia is in terms of the number and quality of the sustainable buildings that go up at the moment, right? So there's a long way to go in Japan. But at the same time, Japan's committed as a government to meet certain sustainability targets over the short and long term. Now, those targets need to be achieved, and you're starting to see pressure come on to the Japanese developers, the Japanese contractors, which has been interesting for us to see because it's created an opportunity for us. They're coming to us and asking us, how did we do that? Why did we do this? And we're pitching a few deals at the moment. And our greatest point of difference with these Japanese partners is the fact that we've done it before. So they're willing to JV with us in Japan, which is very, very rare. That in the 20 plus years I've been here, that has not occurred. However, sustainability is now the fundamental reason why they're looking at working with us. So they know that their international tenants won't come unless they meet these high standards. They know that they haven't got the know-how to do it yet. We do. We've got that head start. We've got a leg up. So if we're ever going to use it, the time is really now. So for Australian businesses who have, particularly in our sector, in the real estate sector, who have experience, have the know-how, this is a great time to be in Japan, because the Japanese developers are starting to feel the pinch from the Japanese government putting pressure on them to do more. So for us now, it's all about leveraging our skills, leveraging our capabilities, and leveraging the relationships we've built over the last 20 years. Now, that will flow on to our capital partners, that will flow on to our subcontractors. So we see a huge opportunity because we've moved quicker than the Japanese have.
Thank you, Andrew. That's really exciting to hear about how there's an opportunity to build more collaboration between Australia and Japan through this. That opportunity and realising it, though, is often going to require quite a lot of capital investment. David, turning back to you, you've already given us some insights into where we are today. Taking a look sort of, say, 5 years forward, where do you think sustainable finance will be, and what do businesses now need to be doing to make sure that they are set up for that?
Sure. What we've seen this year is just the pace of sustainable financing grow and grow and grow. So we certainly expect that trend to continue. And you may see some headlines around sustainable debt blowing through the $3 trillion cumulative issuance mark. It's gone from 2 to 3 trillion in the space of 8 months. We expect that at the current rate, again, Bloomberg are estimating it'll be in excess of 11 trillion by 2025. It's all part and parcel, and really for large borrowers, it's maximising their access to pools of capital. As the Lendlease team would know firsthand, issuing in sustainable debt format often is a complement to their standard debt offering, but what they often find is it attracts a deeper, more liquid pool of investors, and there are pricing benefits of doing so. What we have seen are real opportunities for what people refer to as greeniums, pricing benefits by issuing in labelled green debt, where investors have the assurance that the proceeds are being deployed to specific green or sustainable projects. That is no longer the exception. It's becoming very much the norm in the public debt markets. And I think that what you'll see is in the corporate space, using the Australian example, every corporate financing conversation we have with the ASX listed top 100, 200 companies, sustainable financing is part of that. Whereas 12 months ago, 24 months ago, it was not. The other, on the investment side, we're seeing huge amount of interest out of Japan from the regional banks, insurance companies and the like. And there's a continuing deal flow and opportunities for Japanese investors to participate in that. With the Australian agri sector is a great one. There's no shortage of interest. There's a lot of capital seeking places to be put to work. You'll see a lot of focus here in Australia around carbon farming as one area. So on one hand, you have corporates all making net zero commitments, but in order to reach those, they have to offset their emissions in the near term before they can actually reduce them in absolute terms. That's going to drive the market for carbon offsets. And they're increasingly seeking high quality carbon offsets, so natural based solutions, carbon farming, reforestation. And here in Australia, what that's leading to is private equities coming in, sharing carbon farming opportunities. So the corporates are heavily invested in this space, and I think there's huge opportunity, and it will be going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, David, for those insights. It sounds very exciting. I'm conscious of timing. Gavin, could we turn to you just quickly, just for looking into the organisational side of sustainability? and what some of the challenges have been for the clients that you've dealt with in terms of that transformation, and what's been most important in helping them with that.
I think the biggest thing is actually connecting individuals to sustainability, and how that individual's relationship to the company and society goes. So what you often find is that people are very aware of sustainability outside the office, but as soon as they go into the office, or as soon as they get on a Zoom meeting, they're into that operational tactical level, and they're just worried about their short-term targets, and they're not connecting sustainability and the benefits of it to their everyday work. The other big challenge, I think, and I mean this with no disrespect, is what we call the middle management permafrost. And what we find is that it's the only permafrost we want to melt, basically, because what we're getting is they're getting a lot of pressure from on high, but they're also getting pressure from the more junior people who are more aware of this sort of stuff. But they're not connecting the why and then the how of that into their everyday work. So by doing that, getting people to understand that it's about them, the company, and society, and connecting all of those things, that's where we see the big benefit. I suppose one of the best examples is with a Chambers member out of New Zealand. I haven't got permission to say the actual name because I've come to this panel rather late, but big fruit producer, exporter. They've got global sustainability things coming out of New Zealand, but it became very apparent here in Japan that there wasn't the environment or the culture there that was ready to receive that and be able to integrate it into the thing. So we've worked with them to sort of almost turn rocky barren ground into fertile ground where they can actually sort of plant the global sustainability project. How we've done that is connecting the people to the company, to society. We've got ongoing projects that are sort of giving people responsibility about sustainability inside the company. And it's an ongoing project, but hopefully we might be able to roll that out across Asia once we've settled that here in Japan. And that's the real thing, is getting through that middle management permafrost and then being able to connect intellectually and emotionally to sustainability in people's individual and business life.
Thank you, Gavin, for those insights. Conscious of timing, can I ask a favour of each of the panellists? If you could just leave our audience with one key message today from your experience with sustainability, what would it be? And perhaps if I'll just reverse the order this time and start with you first, Gavin.
Yeah, simple. It's an opportunity, not an obligation. But more importantly, don't forget your people in developing your sustainability strategies, because you can impose as many frameworks and stuff on top of your people, but if they're not on board, you're going nowhere. So it's people and processes that you need to focus on.
Thank you, Gavin. David, over to you.
I would say it's both a risk if you don't address it, but it's a huge opportunity if you do.
Thank you. And Andrew, finally to you.
Yeah, I'd say it's a it's a non-negotiable, but it's also the right thing to do. So it makes it easier to implement when it is the right thing to do.
Some common themes there: an obligation, risk, but it's an opportunity, and it's the right thing to do, and it's a must do. Thank you very much for your time today. Emily, I know you shared earlier in the session the QR code for the sustainability word cloud. Perhaps if it was possible to bring that up again now, just to remind everybody to put their submission in for that. And also, whilst you're doing that, just a reminder that we do have a little bit of time now for Q&A. So if you could drop any questions that you have into the chat function at the bottom of the screen, we'll work through those very shortly, and after the Q&A we'll be sharing that word cloud with you. Perhaps if we start with the questions, and the first one is to Andrew. One of our members of the audience would like to know 1 or 2 immediate action items that the group is now tackling with in your global business value chain from a sustainability aspect.
Sure. So, for example, biofuels and supply of green power. We're actually working with governments in some locations to ensure that that becomes more available. The electrification of construction equipment, ensuring that you're getting green steel, so low carbon emission steel. Working through with our supply chain, looking at more local products to ensure that we're not, flying things across, thousands of kilometres where we can find the same sort of product in country here. So in terms of buildings themselves, you know, ensuring that when we're looking at acquiring buildings, for example, and with those buildings, replacing the glass with double pane glass, you cut your need for power to those buildings by almost half just by doing that. So the good thing for us is that there's opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities. But I would also add well-being is also completely is critical also. So we actually try and package that up, because sometimes, you know, more light in the building means people feel better. Having, you know, end of trip facilities in the building, that means people can bike it in rather than driving a car in. So if you actually mix them together, there's actually more that you can do. So, you know, I'm happy to provide a long list of things that we're doing, but, you know, there's high-tech stuff, there's low-tech stuff. It's just a lot smarter than the way we've operated in the past.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Our next question is a broad question, potentially to all the panelists. It's around the tourism sector. The member of our audience mentions that whilst that sector doesn't generate the highest levels of carbon emissions, it does generate 10% of greenhouse gases and accounts for 10% of global GDP and employment. As we all know, the sector's been hard hit by COVID, and our audience member is interested to hear from our panelists, government and business side, what they think is the best way forward for that sector in sustainability. HK, do you mind if I throw over to you first on this one?
Very happy to try and answer a very difficult question.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, of course, tourism sector is extremely important to the Australian economy, and the impact of COVID has been massive. So our first challenge is to try and open up the borders. As we all know, you know, many Australians, the difficulties around that. But in terms of long-term sustainability of the sector, I think this is a question that requires fundamental rethink. We need to look at the full supply chain of tourism, various input sources, and target where the leverage point is in terms of greenhouse emissions or climate change impacts. So that's really around reducing the emission through looking at transport, for example, right? I mean, everyone who goes to Australia has to catch a plane. And the transport sector and its shift towards clean energy is going to be a fundamental factor in achieving a sustainable tourism sector. But on the opportunity side, I think this is where we can actually combine nature-based solutions, environmentally friendly settings as a real plus for tourism, right? So not environmentally damaging tourism, but environmentally protective, sustaining tourism. And I think those are the opportunity parts of this sort of same coin, if you like. So I'll leave it there because I'm sure our business colleagues have a lot more practical and insightful comments that they can make in response to this.
Thank you very much, HK. And we're certainly seeing that theme of sustainable tourism coming through. Dom, do you mind if I just quickly turn to you from the New Zealand side? You did touch on this in your slides. If there was anything that you did want to add on to that before we turn to the business side for their perspective. I think, Dom, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So sorry about that. Yeah, I mentioned our Minister of Tourism made a speech recently where he talked about, you know, the opportunity to move to lower volume and higher quality, higher spend tourism. Part of the solution has also been recently more local tourism, because without people being able to cross borders, people have been able to, I guess, enjoy the attractions that are nearby. But for the tourism industry, that's only part of the answer because it doesn't fully replace overseas tourists. One other positive development I've just seen recently is that one of our local airlines has committed to introduce electric planes within the next 5 years. So, you know, not too far away.
No, that's a very short term in this transformation. Thank you very much for that, Dom. Gavin, just quickly, did you have any insights from any of the consultancy work that you've done for the tourism sector?
Oh, yeah, actually, I mean, I worked in Europe and Russia and Scandinavia in the tourism, and I've got some good contacts over there and in New Zealand. And one of the things, the companies I used to work with, they did a lot of research over the COVID period, and people's relationship to international travel is changing. A lot of it still at the moment, from an emotional perspective, is based around fear and guilt. So there's a fear of COVID and there's the guilt of traveling. So one of the things that some people that I do know are starting to change their marketing and their behaviors is, okay, how can you assuage the fear and how can you assuage the guilt? So if you're starting to provide a truly sustainable option that is actually provable and, you know, it's not just greenwashing, that is actually starting to impact people's buying decisions. So if you can provide a safe environment like New Zealand and one day Australia again, hopefully, as well as a relatively guilt-free experience about it impacting, particularly flying to New Zealand. A lot of people feel guilt around that. A lot of people coming from Europe to Australia feel the same thing. When they get there, if you can provide a really sustainable option, that might be a good product differentiator in the market against the traditional big boys.
Thank you very much, Gavin. That mindset shift. And I know Qantas has been trying to contribute to that with the ad they've released this week. I think we've all shed a tear or two over that one. Given timing, perhaps if we now share with you the word cloud around sustainability, just to see the reaction from the audience around this topic. Emily, if I can ask you to bring that up now. And perhaps whilst we wait for that to come up, I'm conscious of timing, so I'll just make some final remarks and I'll draw on the word cloud as I do that. Firstly, and most importantly, I really want to thank, on behalf of the Sustainability Committee, the contributions of HK, Dom, Andrew, David and Gavin today, all incredibly busy people who very generously shared their time and their insights with us. I also want to very personally thank the ANZCCJ Chair, Sally, the Secretariat, Emily and Aki, and the EC of the Chamber for their support in establishing this committee. We do generally hope that today's session has been insightful for you, changing mindsets hopefully from this being an obligation to an opportunity, a risk to an opportunity, something that's a must do. And just enshrining in you the critical importance of sustainability to all of our business across all sectors, all sizes of business and all geographies, really bringing through that theme that we're seeing in that word cloud of opportunity, future looking, essential. The Chamber is here to support businesses across Japan, Australia and New Zealand with their sustainability strategies and networking. We know that this can be overwhelming. There's a lot of information out there. We hope that we can help provide some way to navigate through that for you. And also importantly, pulling on the word cloud and the reference to collaboration to provide a networking opportunity for you to be able to achieve these opportunities. Details about the next Sustainability Committee event will be shared with you shortly, and we greatly welcome your feedback on what types of events the committee should be holding. We have a survey about sustainability to understand the needs of your business around this topic, and we very much encourage you to complete that so that we have more information from you. If you'd like to connect with the Chamber around sustainability, we appreciate it's a really broad topic. So what we've done is to set up sector and organisation champions so that you can have more direct and relevant lines of communication with the Chamber. These champions are across energy and infrastructure, real estate and construction, resources, financial institutions, consumer, sport and organisations. Further details of these are available on our website. We do generally hope that you did find today useful. We hope that it's been inspirational around the exciting opportunities for investment, collaboration and trade, and from the sustainability transformation. Thank you in advance for your support for the ANZCCJ Sustainability Committee and for your time today.